Some scouts had him as a third-round pick. A few didn't even have him going in the first 2 rounds at all. That was the read on Easton Cowan heading into the 2023 draft. Good hands, good motor, but small, and small players slide. Everybody in the industry expected it. Then the Toronto Maple Leafs used the very last pick of the first round, 28th overall, and took him anyway. 2 years later, Cowan did something in the biggest tournament in Canadian junior hockey that hadn't been done since 1971. 54 years. That's how long the record stood before an undersized winger nobody wanted in the first round walked in and broke it. And by the time you hear what he did next, skipping the entire minor leagues and stepping straight into an NHL lineup, you'll understand why people around the Leafs organization are starting to use a word they don't use lightly, generational value, at pick 28. We'll get into exactly how that happened. But first you need to understand how buried this kid actually was on draft boards, because what he did afterward makes almost no sense on paper. Let that sink in for a second. A record that survived Wayne Gretzky's entire era, survived every generation of junior hockey superstar in between. Gone. Broken by a kid some scouts didn't think was worth a first-round pick at all. London, Ontario, home of the London Knights, one of the most storied franchises in Canadian junior hockey. Cowan grew up the same way almost every kid in that system does. Early morning skates, small-town rinks, nobody outside the Ontario Hockey League paying much attention. And here's the part nobody likes to admit about junior hockey scouting. Size gets measured before skill does. Cowan had the hands, the compete level, the instinct to force turnovers that scouts loved on tape. But he wasn't tall, and in a league that drafts on projection as much as production, not tall is often the difference between a first-round guarantee and a gamble nobody wants to take. Pre-draft rankings had him sliding into the second round, maybe the third if teams got nervous. The kind of prospect who ends up as a footnote in someone else's draft class. So the question hanging over Easton Cowan going into 2023 was the one that follows every undersized player in hockey. Could the skill actually translate? Or was this a kid who was going to keep dominating players his own age and then hit a wall the moment the competition got bigger, faster, and stronger? Nobody knew yet. The Leafs took the chance anyway, at 28. By the time most third-round afterthoughts are still trying to crack their team's lineup, Cowan had rewritten what people expected from him. In 2024, he led the entire OHL playoffs in scoring, 34 points in just 18 games, and dragged the London Knights to the OHL Championship with a 4-game sweep of the Oshawa Generals. That wasn't a good series. That was domination. And it was only the beginning of what draft analysts had missed. But OHL success is one thing. The Memorial Cup is a different animal entirely. Canada's National Junior Championship, the tournament that decides which team and which players get remembered. Plenty of great junior scorers own an OHL title. Almost none own what came next. Then came the tournament that answered everything. Now, before I tell you exactly what he did, think about what a record surviving over half a century actually means in hockey. The Memorial Cup has been played since before the original 6 era ended. It has seen Hall of Famers, future first overall picks, players who went on to define entire NHL franchises. And through every single one of those tournaments, since 1971, not one player had managed to lead the event in scoring in back-to-back years. Not one. That's not a record that gets broken because a format changed, or the level of competition dipped. That's a record that survives because leading a national tournament in scoring once is already almost impossible. Doing it twice means staying the best player on the ice across 2 entirely different rosters, 2 entirely different playoff runs, with every opposing coach specifically game planning to stop you the second time. Drop it in the comments right now. Did you think a guy some scouts wanted in the third round would be the one to end a 54-year streak nobody else could touch? I need to know if you saw this coming. In 2025, London went back to the Memorial Cup and beat the Medicine Hat Tigers for the title. Cowan tied for the tournament scoring lead. That alone would have been a career highlight for most junior players. But because he'd already led a Memorial Cup in scoring the year before, that result made him the first player since 1971 and 1972, over half a century earlier, to lead the tournament in points in consecutive years. Not one of the best. Not in the conversation. First since 1971. The award that comes with that kind of performance, the Stafford Smythe Memorial Trophy for Tournament MVP, went to Cowan too. Read that again. 54 years. In a tournament this country has used to measure its best young hockey players, since before most of their grandparents were born, exactly 0 players managed what Cowan just did. Until him. And here's the part that gets buried under the highlight reels. In that same stretch, across his regular season and playoff run combined, Cowan put up 29 goals and 45 assists. 74 points of a player scouts weren't sure belonged in the first round at all. The tape didn't lie. The size concern that nearly buried him on draft boards never showed up on the scoreboard. Most prospects with a run like that still need a year or 2 in the minors to prove it translates. The AHL exists specifically to bridge that gap, to let junior stars get physically ready for grown men before the NHL trusts them with real minutes. Cowan skipped it completely, not partially, not a few games before a call-up. 0 AHL games. He went straight from junior hockey into an NHL lineup for the 2025-26 season and simply stayed there. 9 goals, 16 assists, over 60 games, averaging 14 minutes a night as a rookie on an original 6 roster that had no obligation to be patient with him. Think about what that actually means for a kid some teams wouldn't have touched in the first 2 rounds. The organization didn't just believe he could eventually help. They looked at a 20-year-old with one professional caliber tool, an ability to force mistakes and finish plays under pressure, and decided he was ready for the show immediately. No development detour. No, let's see how he handles the pros first. Straight to the NHL, straight into the lineup, and he held his own against grown men for a full season. Wayne Gretzky spent his entire career redefining what junior hockey dominance was supposed to look like before the NHL ever trusted him with a real role. Every great Canadian hockey story eventually gets measured against that standard, whether it's fair or not. Cowan isn't there. Not yet. Not statistically. Not historically. But the shape of the story is impossible to ignore. Doubted on size, buried outside the first round by half the league's scouts, and now the answer to a trivia question that hadn't had a new answer since before the NHL even had a draft lottery. If Gretzky is watching a kid do something in the Memorial Cup that his own generation, and every generation after it, couldn't touch, that's not a coincidence you wave off. That's the exact kind of number that makes hockey people sit up. Toronto heads into 2026-27 with Cowan no longer a curiosity, no longer a watch-this-space prospect buried on a depth chart. He's auditioning for real minutes in the top 6 on a team that hasn't won it all since 1967, and is desperate for exactly the kind of player who does more than the scouting report says he should. The kid teams were ready to let fall to round 3 is now one of the reasons Leafs fans have something to actually believe in. So here's what I need you to tell me in the comments. If a player scouts wanted in the 3rd round can end a 54-year Memorial Cup record and skip the AHL entirely, what does his ceiling actually look like 3 years from now? Top 6 mainstay? Something bigger? Drop it below. I'm reading every single one.